Notes used in this video can be found in topics. This video is going to go back and review just the introduction, the introductory thought of rational expressions. And then this video is also going to get into multiplying and dividing rational expressions. So let's start with a basic review. And I've got this organized by skill set. So I'm going to call the first skill number 1, and it's going to serve as a review. This is something that we've already done last week. So I've copied the problems here for the video, and I will work the problems out. So here you can see I've got this problem, and I'm just copying it here to simplify it down. So my only job is to simplify the expression. I've got one rational expression, and my steps are to factor, list my excluded values or my domain restrictions, and then simplify. The numerator is a difference of squares, and the denominator factors of 42 that sum to 13. So that's step number 1. I factored numerator and denominator. I now look at the denominator only to list my excluded values, trying to prevent division by 0. So my excluded values are -6 and -7. Those are the two variable values that would create division by 0. So I factored, I've listed my domain restrictions, and it's now time to simplify. So I'm looking for common binomial factors top to bottom. They divide out of the problem. I have x plus 6 in the numerator, and it appears in the denominator as well. It divides out of the problem, and then the simplified expression becomes x minus 6 over x plus 7. That's my simplified expression. Moving on to skill number 2. And skill number 2 I call the tricky problems that differ by a factor of -1. So I've taken the two problems from the notes and I've copied those problems. And wait, I can't find my notes. Oh, it's right on the same page I was on. Okay, so skill number 2. So here a basic example, x minus 10 over 10 minus x. I have x minus 10 in the numerator. If I reverse distribute out a -1 in the denominator, that enables me to turn this around to x minus 10. And then x minus 10 divides out top to bottom. And then what remains is simply that factor of -1. So I call these the tricky problems that differ by a factor of -1. And let's look at a problem that contains a product. So I'm going to go ahead and factor, and I did not list my excluded value. Here, x would not be allowed to equal 10. Okay, moving over here, I have a difference of squares in my numerator, so I'm going to factor 5 plus x and 5 minus x, and then my denominator, x plus 7 times x minus 5. List my excluded values. X is not allowed to equal -7 and +5. And now looking at simplifying this, I've got x plus 5 in the numerator and x plus 7 in the denominator. I can't do anything with that. They have nothing in common that can be factored out of the problem. But I've got 5 minus x and x minus 5 differing by that factor of -1. So if I were to think about one of these as removing a factor of -1, and I could have x minus 5 top to bottom, that would allow me to divide that out of the problem. And then my simplified expression would be, you could present the simplified expression. You could write a negative sign in front of x plus 5 and then x plus 7. You could present your answer like that. Or you could see the answer presented possibly like, let's see, let me get another sheet of paper. I could see this answer presented like this. X plus 5 and x plus 7 with a negative sign in front of it. Remember that the fraction bar acts as a grouping symbol. So presenting that final answer in this manner without the parentheses would probably be the more common presentation of the problem. But the reason why the negative sign is introduced starts here. Just to go back and recap the entire problem. The negative sign is introduced because I have 5 minus x, x minus 5, the factors that differ by a -1. And the ability to recognize your answer becomes important when you're in a multiple choice setting or if you're checking your answers with an answer key somewhere. So just wanted to point that out. Okay, let's move on to the new skill of the video, which is multiplying and dividing. And that is skill number 3, multiplying and dividing rational expressions. So I've taken the problems right here and I've copied them on a separate sheet of paper. So to go back to just the basic skill of multiplying fractions, when you multiply fractions, you just multiply straight across. So that just results in A times C over B times D, multiplying straight across. When you divide fractions, you multiply by the reciprocal. So you would have A over B, and you would multiply that by D over C. So you would take the reciprocal of the second ratio, and you would take the reciprocal of the second ratio, and you would change the operation from division into multiplication. And then this would result in A times D over B times C. So that's your basic skill. And let's look at the first example. So here, I've written my steps down. I'm going to factor, I'm going to list my excluded values, and then I'm going to simplify. And when I factor, I'm going to factor in all 4 spots. I'm going to factor each numerator and each denominator. So here I'm going to have x plus 7 and x minus 5. And my denominator is going to be x plus 6, x plus 6. So that's the first ratio written in factored form. And I'm going to multiply this by the difference of squares. And then I'm going to take the second denominator and I'm going to reverse distribute out the 2. Now looking at this, it's time to list the excluded values. So x cannot equal -6, x cannot equal -2. So x cannot equal -6 and -2. Those are the 2 values that would create division by 0. And then you analyze the fractions, comparing top to bottom, numerators to denominators. And the common ratios don't have to appear in the same fraction. The only rule is that the common ratios must appear on different sides of the fraction bar. So here I have an x plus 6 in the first fraction and an x plus 6 in the second fraction. The key trait being that they occur on different sides of the fraction bar. And looking at this problem, I probably had something different in mind when I made it up so that other things would divide out of the problem. Oh, I made a mistake when I copied it. That's what I did. This is 2x plus 14, and then that would make this x plus 7. I thought my intention was something different. And then that changes my excluded values. So here -6 and then -7 is an excluded value. So I copied it wrong when I transferred it from my original notes. So my excluded values are -6 and -7. And now when I'm simplifying this, I see that I have x plus 7 occurring in both numerator and denominator. So x plus 7 from one fraction's numerator, x plus 7 from the other fraction's denominator. And then anything that remains comes together to create the simplified answer. So my simplified answer is going to be x minus 5 and x minus 6. And then I have a 2 in the denominator and an x plus 6. Now it's okay to leave your simplified answer like this. Or you also have the option of multiplying it out. Both presentations are correct, and it doesn't matter how you decide to leave your simplified answer. They're equivalent expressions, and they mean exactly the same thing. So to just go back and recap what I did, I factored both numerators and both denominators. I listed my excluded values, and then I looked for common factors on opposite sides of the fraction bar. So the common factors don't have to be in the same fraction. The only rule is that they must be on opposite sides of the fraction bar. And they divide away, leaving behind a +1, and anything that does not divide out of the problem comes together to create a new ratio. And let's look at the last example in the notes. This is a division problem. And I'm going to go ahead and factor across the board as I said I would. And with something like with a division problem, the excluded value piece becomes very important because in the original presentation, this is the denominator, but once I get into the problem and multiply by the reciprocal, its numerator is going to then take the bottom spot. So I have to be extra careful with my excluded values. So I'm going to do this very, very slowly and piecemeal. So I'm going to take this first numerator and I'm going to factor this. And then my denominator, 3 plus x and 3 minus x. And I'm going to go ahead and just keep this in its natural state to list my excluded values this first time. So I am factoring everything. I'm now going to look at the denominators to list my excluded values. So x cannot equal positive or negative 3. Those are my excluded values. And then in my second step, I'm going to recopy everything. And I'll go ahead and make that an x plus 3, and this is a 3 minus x. And I'm now going to multiply by the reciprocal. And when I do that, that gives me one more excluded value. I now have to add negative 6 to my list of excluded values because now the original numerator has now become a denominator because I've multiplied by the reciprocal. So you just have to be extra careful with your excluded values whenever you're dividing the rational expressions. And now I simplify, looking for common factors. X plus 3, opposite sides of the fraction bar. I have an x plus 6 in both fractions, and that's going to leave me with the 9, x minus 3, and 3 minus x. Notice here that I've got this differing by negative 1 piece. When I remove that, that's going to allow me to divide x minus 3 out of the problem. And then my simplified answer is going to be negative 9. The problem set that I have selected for you all to work on is a puzzle. And I like the puzzles for learning, especially remote learning like this, because if you cannot find the answer, then you know that you're on the wrong track and you need to seek some help before you get too much further into the process. So everything is on the class page. This is the first problem set. All of these are multiplication, and I'm just going to scan this quickly. And here in problem number 5, you've got the differing by negative 1 ratio, but you know how to handle that. Chances are in number 7, you're going to have a differing by a negative number there. And so here, this goes back to an old skill with exponent properties, and I'm going to hold you all responsible for remembering how to do that. But of course, the main focus of what we're doing starts with number 3, and then this is actually taking you into your new skill. And then the second problem set is division. So here, I would simply just go ahead and multiply all of these by the reciprocal. Now, you're not asked to list excluded values on the problem sets, so it's okay if you don't, but it's important to me that you know how to do that. But I'm going to just ask you to present all of your support work for these problems, copy everything neatly, and submit this in the Dropbox.